Our focus remains on Rafah, probably the most dangerous place on earth right now. If the famine doesn't get you, Israel will. If Israel doesn't get you, the lack of aid will. There is simply no escaping it. And Israel is not slowing down. They've taken total control of Gaza's land border. Let me show you the map. Gaza borders two countries, Israel and Egypt. The Egypt border has a demilitarized buffer zone. It is called the Philadelphi corridor. A demilitarized buffer zone. It's around 300 feet wide, and Israel has taken control of it. The question is why? This is what Israel's army says.
The Philadelphi corridor served as Hamas's pipeline through which Hamas engaged in smuggling in Gaza Strip on regular basis.
So that's why Israel says Hamas is using this corridor mainly to smuggle weapons. But Egypt has denied this. They say that there were no tunnels between Gaza and Egypt. And this will complicate matters because Egypt and Israel signed a peace deal back in 1979. They agreed to, on a crucial point here, that the border will remain demilitarized, meaning few or no soldiers will be deployed here. But Israel is risking that peace. They have put tanks and soldiers in the Philadelphia corridor. So will Egypt respond in kind, or do they have patience left? That is the big question at the moment. Meanwhile, in Rafah, the attacks continue. Israel is pursuing two strategies. The first is airstrikes. The second is street fighting. On Wednesday, around 50 strikes were reported in Gaza. Many of them were on Rafah. Israeli aircraft swooped in. They dropped the payload and flew off. Take a look at this. Israel's goal is to eliminate the Hamas, but most of their fighters are inside Rafah's tunnels. So how do these strikes help? Well, that's the thing. The strikes are not just meant for Hamas. They're meant to scare Rafah residents too, to make them flee. Just consider the airstrike on Sunday, the one that killed 45 Palestinian civilians. That strike led to an exodus of Gazans. Now look at the difference in the satellite pictures. You can see the camps empty out.
The situation is scary. With all the shelling, the children are scared. We have no place left to stay.
So the strikes drive people out, which brings us to Israel's second strategy, street fighting. It's pretty intense stuff. Israeli tanks and soldiers have reached central Rafah. They're fighting with Hamas operatives. But how long will this continue? Israel's national security advisor gave a grim timeline. He says another 7 months. That's how long it will continue. That's the whole of 2024, another 7 months. Now, this timeline raises several questions. Number one, what kind of casualties are we looking at? The war in Gaza has been on for almost 8 months already. It has killed more than 36,000 people in this time. Now, add another 7 months to it. How many more people will die? And question number two, why will it take 7 months? Rafah is the only city still standing. Netanyahu himself called it the last phase of the war. Why would this last phase take 7 more months? And what comes after that? Will it be a civilian alternative to Hamas or an Israeli military occupation? Prime Minister Netanyahu is yet to answer any of these questions. His officials are basically winging the war. The US is not too happy about this. Apparently, that's where Washington draws the line. Bombing refugees, no problem. Post-war plan, big problem. But others are sharper in their criticism, like Turkish President Erdogan. He's calling Netanyahu a blood-sucking vampire.
And I think this underscores the imperative of having a plan for the day after. Because in the absence of a plan for the day after, there won't be a day after. And this is where we need to go, and we need to get as quickly as possible.
The world is watching the barbarism of a sick man, a maniac, a psychopath, and a blood-feeding vampire called Netanyahu, and they are watching it on live broadcasts.
India too has expressed concern. Remember, New Delhi was among the first to condemn Hamas, but Netanyahu's war has forced a rethink. India has reiterated its recognition for the Palestinian state. It has also expressed concern about the airstrikes on Rafah. Listen to this.
The heartbreaking loss of civilian lives in the displacement camp in Rafah is a matter of deep concern for us. We have consistently called for protection of civilian population, that these European countries have now come up and recognized Palestine as to how we look at it. Let me tell you that, India recognized Palestine way back in the 1980s.
Street protests also continue. The U.S. city of Chicago saw major demonstrations. Hundreds of people protested Israel's war. They called for a ceasefire in Gaza. And guess who's advising these protesters? Iran's supreme leader. Talk about an unexpected crossover. The Ayatollah has written a letter to American protesters, especially to those in college. Listen to what he wrote. You are standing on the right side of history. You have now formed a branch of the resistance front and have begun an honorable struggle. My advice to you is to become familiar with the Quran. You can imagine the response. American politicians have slammed the Ayatollah. They've also sent a message to the college protesters. If Iran's supreme leader is supporting you, you are probably wrong. And it's hard to argue with that. Also, I wonder where this advice was for Iran's anti-hijab protesters. They got tear gas and jail cells. I guess that wasn't a resistance front. But all this pressure does matter because that's the only way to stop the war. As long as holdouts remain, Israel will push on. And right now, that holdout is the United States of America. A ceasefire resolution will soon be tabled at the United Nations Security Council. Guess who is opposing it? The United States. So Israel's isolation is not complete, and that is Netanyahu's signal to go on.
South Africa's May 29th elections.
It was a start of change in the country.
We are on the verge of history.
I am standing here at the forefront of change where voices echo the call for action. The nation grapples with an unemployment crisis. As South Africans prepare to cast their votes, the question looms, will the winds of change usher in a new era, or will the legacy of the past maintain its grip on the future?